back, slightly different context. Obviously, we're thinking about the supply chain. Obviously, we're thinking about third parties. But instead of buying sparkly boxes, it's very possible that people could just think about privacy and threat modeling. What are you going to talk about today?
So let me start my slides. I hope you can see these.
Oh, yes.
So I will talk about privacy and threat modeling, and I thought I would share my story from all the misconceptions I've come across in the past 10 years. I've been working on privacy and security and threat modeling. So a brief introduction. I'm a researcher at the IMEC District Research Group at KU Leuven, which is a university in Belgium. And well, obviously I work on privacy and threat modeling, and I would love to get in touch, so feel free to reach out. So I have been working on privacy threat modeling for the past 10 years, and I've heard a lot of things when I make that announcement. So I thought I would guide you through these misconceptions, and I hope I can remove some of them in the next half hour, sorry. So let's start with the first one. When I tell people I work on privacy, people tend to say, really, privacy? But why? Who cares? We don't need privacy. I have nothing to hide. But is that really true? Is it really true that you don't care that everybody knows what happens inside your house? Imagine that when you walk by your house, when somebody walks by, they can see what is happening inside. And let's just consider the digital stuff that goes on there. So that they can see your grocery lists, even when you're a pandemic hoarder, that they can see all the pictures of your kids you store in the cloud, maybe even the drunk pictures, that they know your medical history, that they know whether or not you're vaccinated or you will not get vaccinated, that they know your bank transactions, your bank account balance, that they know all your messages, even the less appropriate ones. And if this is making us uncomfortable, why is it that we are not uncomfortable by the fact that all of this is actually happening and servers are processing this information, are making some calculations with it, or making some assumptions about what we are doing, profiling us, and so on? We should care, and companies should take privacy into account. Now, fortunately, we are seeing some changes there, and some companies are starting to, fortunately, see privacy as a competitive advantage. I just took a couple of snippets from news articles. Like a couple of months ago, there was this big change where people, a change in policy for WhatsApp. And actually over the weekend, a lot of people switched from WhatsApp to Signal. And we also see that big companies such as Apple are really pulling that privacy card. Whether it's really about privacy or other things, I leave that question open, but we see that more and more companies are looking at privacy as a competitive advantage. And if you're not convinced that it's the right thing to do, then there's of course still legislation, data protection legislation that is being enforced, that is forcing companies to think about data subject rights, processing principles, and concepts such as privacy by default and privacy by design. And it's in fact that privacy by design part I will be focusing on today. So that means that you really think about privacy early on and throughout the development lifecycle. All right, so just a bit of positioning of privacy. So what I also hear is, yes, privacy, we're concerned, and we got it covered. We have encryption and we have access control. So no privacy issues here. But actually, privacy is not a synonym for security. This is my working definition for privacy. To me, privacy means that you can control the consequences of exposing personal information in a given context. So if you think back of the example I gave of the house and all the stuff that's going on there, you might be comfortable sharing drunk pictures with your friends, but not your colleagues. You might be comfortable with sharing your bank account balance with your husband or wife, but not with your neighbors. So it's all very context dependent, and it's really about you being the one in control of who gets access to it. So it means you, as an organization, as a computer system, you should limit the processing, the collection of personal data, and you should provide a means for the individual, the data subject, to be informed about what's going on, and hand them means to intervene in the processing. Let's focus a bit, let's zoom a bit more into the details of privacy. These are 7 privacy threat categories. Together, they form the acronym LINDEN, and I will come back to LINDEN in a bit. I don't have the time to go in full detail over all of the categories, but I thought I will just give a couple of sentences of explanation for each of the categories, so you just get a flavor of what privacy is. So you also realize it's not just about confidentiality. And I thought I would make it a bit more lightweight. And I like to use animal pictures actually to talk about privacy. So for the first 2 categories, I combine them because they're very related. Identifiability is a privacy threat related to anonymity. So identifiability means that within a set of subjects, you can identify one specific subject. That doesn't mean that you need to know the full name, address, social security number. It's sufficient to be able to single out somebody and link that to the natural person. So in this picture, if I talk about the yellow duck, you all know which one I'm talking about, while we don't know its name, its DNA sequence, or whatever. And the fact that that property, the color yellow, uniquely identifies the duck also means that linkability is very related to the concept, because the more properties you have and you can link to one individual, the more unique that combination, that set of properties becomes, and the more likely that individual is identifiable. So linkability and minimizing properties is very related to identifiability. Then there's non-repudiation. That is a privacy threat. For the security people here, I know it can be confusing because non-repudiation is a security property. For privacy, it can be a threat. And for some situations, you like to have plausible deniability as an individual. Then there's detectability. That means without having access to it, you can deduce information, you can detect something. So without seeing what's on the back of this leaf, we have a pretty good idea of the animal that's behind this. The same applies to data. Without having access to a database, just knowing that data is there about somebody specific in a rehab facility, without actually having access to the transactions made to the website ilovepinkunicorns.com, just knowing that there are transactions can make you assume that I know or I am a big fan of pink unicorns. So just by seeing things without really having access to the data within can already reveal, can detect information. Then there's information disclosure. This is one we borrowed from security. So this is related to confidentiality. That means you, from a security perspective, it means you want to protect your assets. From a privacy perspective, it means that as a company, as a system, you need to protect the individual's personal data. And then there are what we call the more soft privacy categories: unawareness, non-compliance. Those are more related to the legislation properties, such as transparency, such as intervenability and processing principles. So this is really, in a nutshell, the Linden categories. Of course, there are different privacy taxonomies as well, similar to the security CIA, so confidentiality, integrity, and availability. There's also the privacy ones, which are unlinkability, intervenability, and transparency. Or you also have the NIST counterpart. It's basically the same properties, but with different terminology. And there's also different taxonomies, more legal ones, more focusing on solutions and strategies, for which Jaap and Hoekman's design strategies are really good, and so on. So the security people in the room might say, wow, wait a minute, you were just saying that non-repudiation conflicts with what we require as non-repudiation, and you want anonymity and unlinkability, we want strong authentication. We really don't like that privacy thing you're proposing. And so this is what people tend to see, that privacy and security conflict, but in fact, it should not be. You can find ways to still have authentication while having, for instance, anonymous credentials to still guarantee a level of anonymity or pseudonymity. You can have a system such as an online voting system where you have plausible deniability about who you voted for, yet you have non-repudiation about the fact that you actually voted. So it doesn't need to conflict, but the trick is that you have to take privacy and security into account early on, so you can find a positive sum solution rather than have a zero sum and have one or the other. So it's about finding the winning result, basically. Okay, another one. This is not just about privacy, but also applies to security. Okay, we're convinced we need to have privacy or security in our system now. Give us the quick fixes so we're done with it. And if you think about GDPR 3 years ago now, we all got this very, very annoying email saying, well, please give us consent because we want to keep spamming you with newsletters. And look, we updated our privacy policy, have a look at our privacy notice. And yes, these are quick fixes. Well, I think they typically are quick fixes. And yes, they are required, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. This is actually a misconception that you can also rephrase as this one. This was actually triggered by a conversation I had with Vellum. So another way of describing this misconception is, well, I bought this one solution, this one tool, basically a magic glitter box, and it will fix all my security problems, or it will fix all my privacy problems. And it might fix part of a privacy issue or part of a security issue. It might help you with consents for newsletters. It might help you to get an understanding of all the data in your system. And I don't know what else of solutions you have, but it will not solve the entire security or privacy chain of issues. I will focus again on privacy, but basically the same applies to security. Privacy should be tackled proactively. So that's basically the foundation of privacy by design. Tackle it early on, do it in a systematic way, integrate it in the development life cycle, do it early on so it can have an impact on the design decisions later on. And basically, if you look at these properties, what is a perfect match for this is threat modeling. Now, I don't know all of your backgrounds, so I will give you some high-level background information on threat modeling. Basically, what is threat modeling? It means that you think about what can go wrong, so you can fix it before it actually happens. And Adam Shostak described it with 4 basic questions. So you think about what can go wrong. To do so, you first need to know what you're working on. You need to have an understanding of the system. Once you have determined what can go wrong, you want to tackle that, you want to do something about it. And then in the final step, you need to reflect on what you've done. It's very easy, I would say, but it makes so much sense. And it still needs some technique and some knowledge to pull this off in a successful way. So if you're new to threat modeling or want to get started, I recommend you have a look at the Threat Modeling Manifesto. This is a nice 2-pager that Agile Stationery made as a poster. You can find all the information, the values, the principles, the patterns that a group of threat modeling experts determined. And I was fortunate to co-author on the website. And it's basically the foundation of threat modeling. And if you're interested, I highly recommend the books by Adam Shostak, by Izar and Matt, and by Brooke to get you started with threat modeling. I will come back to some of these concepts in the next misconception. Okay. So maybe some of you already have security threat modeling in your development lifecycle. And you say, okay, sure, we got this covered. Security threat modeling is here and it suffices. But does it? Well, in essence, yes, because threat modeling, it's the same. We always have the same 4 steps. However, it requires a different mindset. Security is about protecting data. Privacy is about protecting personal data of individuals. So security, you look at the problem as we want to protect the data, the assets of our company. For privacy, we want to protect the assets from the perspective of the data subject, of the individual. So while for security, you're trying to protect against attackers, external ones, maybe internal ones, but attackers, from a privacy perspective, attackers are just a tip of the iceberg, and it's often about internal misbehavior, about doing stuff that you shouldn't be doing with the data of individuals. Excuse me. Okay, so let me zoom into the Leuven privacy threat modeling framework. So Leuven is inspired by Stride, which is Microsoft's security threat modeling framework. It follows the 4 steps of as defined by Adam Shostak. Due to time, I will not dig into the details, but what I want to highlight is that even if you know how to do this, the 4 steps I list here, that's not enough. You need to know how you can think about privacy. So in addition to the process, you also need some sort of knowledge. And that's where Leuven, the acronym, comes into play, because Leuven provides knowledge support categorized according to these 7 categories. I will not go into details here, but basically you need to create a model of the system. And for each of the elements, you want to think about what can go wrong in a systematic way. And to think about what can go wrong, you can look at the threat catalog Leuven provides, which is basically an overview of common privacy threat types classified according to the Leuven categories. And then you identify threats. And then in the next step, you will want to manage them. And also there Leuven provides knowledge support categorized according to the 7 Leuven threat categories. And of course, you still need that reflection step. You need to iterate, you need to refine your analysis. Leuven was created 10 years ago, and it has been gaining some growing attention, both in academia and in industry. It has been included in an ISO report, has been mentioned by in an EDPS opinion, a NISA opinion, has been supported in an OWASP threat modeling tool, and so on. If you're interested, you can have a look at the Leuven website. Everything is freely available there. Okay, I have 2 more short misconceptions, so I will try to keep us a bit into time. So privacy threat modeling, okay, I like the idea, I will do this, and I'm safe, I'm compliant, no fines for me. Well, of course, you have privacy threat modeling, but data protection compliance, well, it's related, but it's not completely the same. Data protection impact assessment is risk-oriented, GDPR is risk-based, so that's the same for privacy threat modeling. It's model-driven. You need to know your system. You need to have a model and understanding of the system for both. So that's also the same. However, threat modeling focuses on the architectural part of the system. And it can help you prove that you have done or have implemented the appropriate technical measures that are required by GDPR, that you have done that by design. But you also will need a legal assessment because you need to document controllers, processes, processing operations, purpose specification, and do a compatibility assessment of those. And that's the legal part that is not contained within a typical privacy threat modeling exercise. So as a final misconception, okay, well, I use threat modeling technique X, and I'm convinced that that's the only one, and I will try to convince everybody else because if they don't use it, they're wrong. I'm a bit biased with my background for Leuven, but of course that's not true. It's not true for privacy, it's not true for security. Which technique should you use? Well, it really depends on your requirements, on the company culture, on your personal preferences, on your level of expertise. Do you need a very thorough, fully documented process, or do you just want to have a high-level, quick assessment? Just for Leuven, we actually have 3 variants we see used. So the one I just really quickly described, we call the full version of Leuven. And it really guarantees a high degree of thoroughness and traceability, but that comes at a cost. It is quite time and labor intensive, and you still need some expertise. So what we see in practice is that people brainstorm, but they just use the high-level Leuven categories, and that's great because you really reduce that overhead of having that process and documentation. However, the success, the thoroughness, the traceability really depends completely on the expertise of the analyst. So we wanted to close that gap, and we proposed a more lean version, which is called Leuven Go. It's actually a deck of cards that still provides that traceability and thoroughness to a sufficient level, but really lowers the effort and reduces the expertise you require to pull this off successfully. And if you want to know more about that, you can, yes, also, if you still want to stick to that brainstorming part, using the Leuven Go, using Leuven, the categories, we also have created some high-level category cards to at least give you some more guidance when you apply that high-level brainstorm based on Leuven categories. You can find everything, also the Leuven Go cards, on the Leuven website. We also have a digital card deck. You can also order a printed deck. And before I leave you, I want to give you some of my suggested resources. Well, we have the Leuven website. We have some background information on privacy engineering. There's also this booklet about guidelines for GDPR or data protection in software development targeted at SMEs. It's in Dutch, but I think it's it can be interesting for this audience. And then there's some references to the threat modeling resources I mentioned before. All right. So that was really rushing through it, but if there are any questions and if there's still time, I'm happy to answer. If not, feel free to reach out and we can take that offline. Thanks.
Fantastic. And it's lovely to look at this, because I think people hear threat modeling, they think, maybe that's an entirely new skill set. But it can be learned, it can be modeled. And that Henk says, love agile stationery. Yes, I have my agile stationery cards. They're in the next room, otherwise I'd have flashed them up. Henk said, people forget some of the best modeling is free as long as you know how. Is that generally a message that you want to get across, or is it more complicated?
Well, yeah, the know-how is always a tricky part, of course, but yeah, it doesn't have to cost anything. If you know, well, Stride is free, Linden is free. So if you, I think those are great resources to get started with for security and privacy threat modeling, and you extend that to or with the knowledge you have for a specific context, for a specific domain, for a specific company. And the tricky part is just getting started, I think, and you will develop the skill set and the knowledge while you go.
I like it. Well, perfect. People can get in touch with you. I'm sure they want Linden Go on their slide decks. So that would be awesome. Guido says, great presentation. Great speaker, Kim. Thanks very much. Well, this is excellent, but it is only a snapshot. There's more to be learned. So please do get in touch with Kim. And also we've added some of snapshots on the Discord channel. So feel free to interact there.